Good evening, everybody. It is Monday, June the 20th. U.S. markets were closed. Canadian and international were open. European central banks on the agenda. The Federal Reserve supporting the debt markets. Lots to discuss, including possible directions for the market. So let's get started. I'm your wealth guy. Let's talk money. Let's talk market preview for the week. All right, so first things first, thank you everybody for tuning into the channel. I really hope you like today's content. If you do, please don't hesitate, hit that like, subscribe, share, but most importantly, I really want to hear what you have to say, so please comment. I'd like to know what your thoughts are on where the markets are headed next. But let's jump right in. I'm not really going to focus too much on what the markets were doing. If we take a look, the Canadian markets did do very well today, up about 270 points the last I looked. I can't imagine it really pulled back very far from there. But even futures markets, which were open, are actually very well into the green, with the US 30 up about 273 points. The 500 were up about 40. But I really want to focus here on the European Central Bank and their new tools that they deployed as part of their emergency meeting last week to try to support the debt market and what it could mean for equity markets, what it could mean as far as central banks are concerned. So the Federal Reserve, the Central Bank of Canada, or the Bank of Canada, and how I think the markets, or what direction I should say, the markets will take in the near future, because there are two key areas of thought here, and they are drastically different up front, but maybe in the long term, the exact same result. But let's get into it, because last week, as I mentioned on Thursday, the European Central Bank had an emergency meeting in which they had to deploy a new set of tools to help essentially buoy or support the debt market. And you saw immediately the results. So if we take a look at what happened with the debt market prior to the Federal Reserve's announcement of 75 basis point increase on Wednesday, the debt market was spiking up very aggressively, multiple sessions, 5%, 6%, at one point an intraday high of over 8% spike in a single day before pulling back down to about the 6%. So we're talking about tens of basis points here increases, which is very significant for the US 10-year yield. Now, following the Fed announcement on Wednesday, as far as the 75 basis point increase was concerned, the next day, and keep in mind, the news wasn't great. Even Fed Chair Powell's post-announcement question and answer period weren't very great. The news was very bleak. I'm not going to say that it was a true hawkish statement or sentiment, but it definitely wasn't dovish by any means. But somehow the markets bounced to the upside, finished positive about 350 points. But then the next day we saw the markets sell off. But one thing we did see for 2 days in a row were the debt markets, or the US 10-year yield especially, drop quite aggressively and quite significantly. And I anticipate we may very well see the same thing tomorrow. And what this indicates to me, it's not retail investors that are suggesting, hey, we should jump in and buy the debts here. These are great opportunities to buy some debt. Quite the contrary. I think that the retail market is still on the sidelines at this point, terrified to re-enter the markets for the most part. There are people that are taking advantage of this sell-off and are buying the dip here. But what I think is really happening is the central banks are now stepping up, printing more money, buying more debt, keeping the lifeline there for the debt market. Because if the debt market collapses, so again, back to if we see multiple spikes here, that could indicate the end of the equities run, and it will be a very aggressive fall to the downside, something we've probably never seen, at least not in multiple decades, where we would probably see another 50-point correction or so from where we are today, which is 20 points off the mark. Or 20%, I should say, off the mark. Now, looking forward, based on this information, the Federal Reserve has certainly met with the European Central Bank and has certainly discussed deploying the same tactics here, even though I've been saying for a long time the printing will not stop in the US. It certainly is not going to stop here in Canada, as we've seen article after article over the last 4 or 5 days discussing different ways that the central bank or the Fed here is just going to print billion after billion after billion. And sure, it's not the trillions as in the US, but for a population of 35, 36, 38 million, whatever it is, billion after billion is a very significant move as far as printing here in Canada. Now, I'm going to anticipate that for the short term, we have two major directions that the market could play out. Number one, the markets could see this as an opportunity to bounce. They'll move to the upside, possibly hitting even new highs. I'm going to go right to the extreme. Is that out of the realm of possibility? No. Is it the probable situation or scenario? I'm going to say no. The odds are the second scenario, and that's where we're going to see the markets react well, probably for a couple of days. After all, the market is up today here in Canada. European markets were up earlier, as well as Asian markets. And I imagine we may even see a couple more days of this. I think this short bump to the upside will give an opportunity for people who wanted to get out to get out or transition into something else. But I think what's really going to happen is after that, the markets will slowly begin to pull back down. And it's just the momentum of the market, because you see what money printing will do is create more inflation. So now we're getting an accelerated bump here in inflation from two angles. So even though we were still getting it before, but now it's going to be accelerated. We were getting it from these minor bump ups in interest rates, which accelerate inflation on their own, because as you increase in small increments, the speed of and the acceleration of inflation will continue to move to the upside, and it'll actually not do what they're suggesting, which is curb inflation. But then you're also going to get it now by printing more money. So the logic in that and what they're doing here is we're going to print more money to help curb inflation, which is created by printing more money. I don't even have words for that. I don't have words for that. This is very much a Band-Aid solution, a kick the can down the road scenario that's going to end up accelerating the process to potentially a very significant market correction, further than what we've already seen, which isn't, although yes, we're in bear territory, it hasn't been a scary correction with the exception of probably the last 2 weeks. Up until that point, it was very much just a standard market pullback, but the last 3 weeks has been very aggressive and concerning. So two possible scenarios. One, the market moves up, possibly up as high as new all-time highs before crumbling all the way back down, or a short-term bump, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, nothing too aggressive to the upside before the reality of the situation and the understanding that recession is still looming, inflation is still going to skyrocket and probably faster now, starts to set back in, and the markets pull right back to where they were and continue their downside momentum. But I guess that remains to be seen which direction the markets will take. I'm gonna openly say I feel that scenario number 2 will probably be the most probable scenario that the markets will take. Especially we do have Canadian CPI being reported this week. I can't imagine it's going to be positive. And once the U.S. inflation numbers come in soon, we're going to see that the attempts by central banks to curb inflation is actually faltering. I would be very, very shocked, and I will say caught off guard, if there's a flattening or even a reduction in the U.S. inflation numbers when they do eventually get reported. This week, we do have a number of other reportings. We do have initial jobless claims, as usual. We do have retail sales tomorrow here in Canada. We do have home sales tomorrow, I believe, reported in the U.S. Thursday will be a very busy day as far as reporting is concerned. So later in the week, I can anticipate a little more volatility, but we'll see what happens. It is going to be an interesting week, that's for sure. That's it, everybody. I will see you at the opening bell.